Okay, good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Gaillard, and I'm going to talk on behalf of a team of researchers and students from the University of Auckland in New Zealand, and a couple as well from Alberta and Massey in New Zealand as well. And I'm going to talk about homelessness, or homeless people in disasters, which is kind of an unusual topic, I guess. And by homeless people, I mean people who sleep rough, or those who are temporary sheltered by NGOs in shelters. So I'm going to talk about streeties and not people actually made homeless by disasters. And I'm going to use data collected from some fieldwork in Delhi, in India, and some ongoing data collection we have in New Zealand at the moment, and plus some other anecdotal evidences from France and the US. Now, the first thing I want to address is what kind of hazards actually lead to disasters for the homeless. And unsurprisingly, homeless people are more concerned about what we call everyday hazards than the big time kind of event, the rare events. And I'm using a quote here from the Auckland City Mission, which is one of the main shelters in Auckland, which refers to the importance of the weather patterns, especially the rain. For the homeless, a very small rain can actually become a very big issue. Because these guys bring all their stuff with them. So if they are outside at the time of the rain, they get wet, and they've got no ways to actually get their stuff dried, which means that they are likely to get sick in the coming days. It may start with a cold, but afterwards it may evolve in something more serious, which means that they will get physically weak on the long term, which will make them further vulnerable to other hazards, including harassment, including physical aggression, and other natural hazards as well. So this is a kind of protracted dimension of hazards, which is very, very interesting in the case of homeless people. And it starts with a very, very small, seemingly insignificant event. Now, we usually hear about homelessness in connection to marginalisation, in connection to poverty, in connection to lack of access to resources, which is obviously the main driver of vulnerability in facing hazards, and a whole range of hazards again. And this starts with their invisibility in society, social invisibility and political invisibility. I'm going to use here a quick vignette from one city in New Zealand, Napier, which is on the Pacific shore, and which is actually very prone to earthquakes and tsunami as well. If you ask the city council there, they will tell you, there's no homeless people in our city, as in none. But if you actually ask the shelters, the NGOs, they will tell you, as of last year, there were 44 homeless people actually staying in the city. And most of them will stay in places which are obviously hidden, or in places which are of less value to many other citizens, including on the beach here, just behind the main facilities of the port area. And you can actually see the main port facilities at the back. It doesn't work anyway. And this area is obviously very prone to tsunami in the case of a near-shore earthquake, which is very possible in this area. So these guys would be totally invisible in case of any early warning issued by civil defense or the council. And this leads us to the root causes of vulnerability. So I'm using here the triangle of vulnerability. So you may have seen this diagram in a more theoretical perspective in some publications. What I want to point here is that the root causes of vulnerability for the homeless are largely, not exclusively, but largely exogenous to them. The root causes of vulnerability actually refer to how power and resources are shared within the society. And in that particular case, it starts with, housing policies. and the overall political strategy of the government. It includes as well the economic structures and how, again, wealth is distributed and how much employment is available for the homeless. And you've got as well some very strong social factors, including ethnicity, including caste. In India, obviously, you've got more lower caste and Dalit caste in the streets of Delhi than upper caste. And the same in New Zealand, where you've got many more Pacific Islanders or Maori actually being homeless than Pakeha, the white New Zealanders, the European New Zealanders. And these root causes of vulnerability on the apexes of the triangle actually drive access to resources, which leads to vulnerability through a process of marginalization. So the pressure comes from the outside, and the homeless are actually made vulnerable by the structural forces. And it's going to be important later on when we're going to talk about DRR and how to include the homeless in DRR. Now, it doesn't mean that because they are vulnerable that they are as well helpless. And this is an interesting case because they seem to be the marginalized amongst the marginalized, the poorest of the poorest, in any context, be it in India or in New Zealand, but still they display capacities. And at first we were a bit, when doing fieldwork, we were a bit kind of unsure about what kind of capacities they would display in facing hazards and disasters. And actually, I think this guy from an NGO in Wellington nicely summarizes the whole range of knowledge, skills, resources homeless people actually display in facing hazards and disasters, including the fact that they are used to live in a kind of precarious situation on a daily basis. So they are used to actually struggle to make a living and to forage for food, to fight to get attention from the government, to fight to get a shelter. So they are actually displaying a lot of capacities. And I'm going to use another diagram here, which you may have seen as well in some publication, which is the circle of capacities, where we broke down the different forms of capacities displayed by the homeless into different categories. The categories are not that important anyway, but what's important is the wide range of capacities they actually display, ranging from their ability to forage for food, to forage for water, for example, be it rainwater or fresh water, their local knowledge of places where they actually roam on a daily basis. They've got somehow better access to some resources in central business districts than people living in suburbs. They know very well where the public buildings are and where they can seek shelter in case of an emergency, be it a public library, be it a public building or whatever. They've got within their own community very strong ties, kinship, ethnicity based. For most of them, they still manage to have some form of informal economic activities in Delhi or in New Zealand, which still enables them to gather a few amount of money to sustain some of their needs. They get some attention. They steal some attention amongst NGOs, which support them. So there's a wide range of capacities. And the idea of the diagram here, having a circle and not anymore a triangle, unlike for the vulnerability, is that here those capacities are largely endogenous to those who are vulnerable. I mean, they are locally available, which means that in terms of DRR, and that's going to be my final point, it's always much easier to enhance capacities than to reduce vulnerabilities. Obviously, if you want to address vulnerabilities in that particular case, and this is paramount to actually address disaster risk for the homeless, you have to actually think of restructuring the society. And in the first place, housing policies. And we know how neoliberal housing policies are actually widespread nowadays. So it's not that easy. However, what we can do in terms of considering homelessness in DRR is obviously to enhance their capacities and to foster their capacities and their participation at large in the DRR process. I'm using here just a picture of San Francisco. I'm not sure if you actually can see the tsunami sign over here on top of the post. And that guy here just pushing a trundler. And this is an interesting thing, by the way. Because they carry all their stuff with them in trundlers or in bags, they are quite mobile. So it's very easy for them to evacuate, actually. The point is how do you evacuate when the evacuation routes are designed for cars or maybe for people with physical abilities that some of these homeless people don't have. Many of them are actually sick and physically weak because of the rain issue, for example, I mentioned earlier. Now, on paper, it's kind of, okay, easy to enhance the capacities. The point here, what's missing most of the time, as emphasized by this NGO staff in Wellington, is the trust. Many non-homeless would assume at first that the homeless are lazy, that the homeless are unwilling to work, that they are marginal, that they are resistant to the law, that they object whatever you try to suggest to them, which is actually untrue. So the issue is to build trust. And to build trust requires to actually open up a dialogue with them. And how do you open up a dialogue? Is a tricky question. How do you bring them on the same table of discussion for DRR with the councils, for example, in New Zealand and in the US, with NGOs, with the scientists as well, in terms of where the hazards are for them? Wellington is doing a good job at the moment. They are trying to engage with the homeless, but it's a very, very rare case. And I think this issue of building trust and opening up a dialogue in the first place is one of the key issues. And that was me. Thanks a lot. Any queries, any questions? Or should I advertise my next talk at 3:15 afterwards? Thanks.